All right. Well, this is WV Sports Now. I am Mike Asti, and the men's basketball program, they've been struggling this year, while the women's basketball program has been winning this year. We're going to talk about both ends of the spectrum of West Virginia basketball here in kind of this mid-February update, reset type of show here for WVSN. We will get towards March and talk about what maybe could happen in March and then beyond, because one team is looking like they're going to be a part of the madness and the other team not so much. I will now bring aboard my colleague here at WV Sports Now, Ethan Bock, who is our men's basketball beat writer, and we now will get into, to lead things off, Ethan, this is a question probably on everybody's mind, and everyone knows this men's team, it's rough right now. 8 wins as we are speaking. We jokingly talked on a few shows ago after a post game that will they get to the level of the men's the football team? Will they get to the football team win total? Will they reach 9? And that was off a bowl win. This men's basketball team right now has 8. This is going into the Baylor game as we're speaking. So how did it get to this point? And I asked that because they did have the upset win over Kansas. It did look like they were finally gelling. They did get a lot of the players on the court together. And then kind of after that, and even a little bit obviously before, the wheels just fell off. And this program right now is in the midst of one of its worst seasons in a while. And it looks like this season is basically over for all intents and purposes. So, how did we get it being this bad when they did have a peak high moment not that long ago?
Yeah, I was in this. I've been switching both sides after the little stretch of Kansas, Texas, Cincinnati wins. Maybe they'll get past the football win total, but now I'm back on the side of I don't know. I don't know if they can get to double digit wins. I don't know if they can get to 10 wins. So
Yeah.
um, I mean, this team can't win on the road. They can't win away from Morgantown, and at home they're way more competitive than they were during non-conference somehow
Sure.
in the Big 12. They're not an easy beat at home, but at the same time, they're not defending home court like they could. Um, K State, BYU, for example, were games at home that the Mountaineers could have took advantage, got quality wins, and then they
Yeah.
just blew it. So just off of that BYU loss at home, team had a week off, and it just seemed like that Texas road trip to Austin and Fort Worth, they just didn't have anything going. Didn't seem like the team was prepared at all. It just almost looked like they just showed up. So uh,
Yeah.
30 plus point loss in Austin, lost by 16 in Fort Worth. So now here we are. West Virginia still doesn't have a win away from Morgantown.
No, and that also doesn't even speak about the UCF debacle, and that was after the big moment of beating Kansas. You kind of pop the balloon a little bit that okay, this happened. Everyone's excited, bringing up the football program again. The football coaches were talking about how well the basketball program played in that big win, and then just no real excitement or feeling like the momentum could continue since that time. And obviously, the totality of the resume probably was going to ruin the season regardless, with the bye game losses and all the problems at the beginning of the year when the roster was depleted and you're dealing with suspensions and injuries and players out. But once you got everyone together, you saw a peak moment, and then you're saying it looked like they weren't prepared. Obviously, Big 12 road games are tough. Bob Huggins even struggled, to be fair, the last couple years on the road against Big 12 play. That was a problem for Bob Huggins. Even in NCAA tournament years, they were struggling on the road against Big 12 teams. They just did enough in the other games that you got to win, that you're mentioning the home games or certainly the out of conference play, that it made the resume enough to get in. This team didn't do that. But that has to feel like that right there could be the death knell for this coaching staff, that if you're having a meeting with Ren Baker to evaluate the year, and he's well aware of how this was really an unfair situation to this staff, even though they did get this opportunity this year after the drama, and the expectations for him quietly probably were not to make the tournament. He might have been fine with keeping them if they even had a solid year or impressed or got even 500 play. But to have those moments where you get the big win, you're riding high, and then you don't look prepared, that's the indictment. So how could they have been so unprepared? What does Eilert say when you've talked to him and that's kind of alluded or brought up after those games to kind of refresh our memory? And is that also kind of the glaring moment for you that, okay, I could have maybe bought in, given this program, given this coaching staff, even 1-year deals, if not a long-term situation to try to reboot and get a regular offseason before you go into it without drama? But when you have those moments where people are saying you're not prepared after a big win, that's it.
Yeah, Josh Eilert took blame on Saturday after the loss to Texas. Said he didn't have the guys prepared. But it begs you have to ask the question. It's not just this season that this program struggled on the road,
Yeah.
especially in conference play, but pretty much since post COVID, this team's 2-22 in
A
Big
lot of
12
different
road games
rosters.
the
I mean,
last
that's a
three
lot of different
seasons.
players that have been in and out.
A lot of different rosters, a lot of
Yeah.
different players coming and going.
Yeah.
Even coaches, obviously, assistants, but still,
Yeah.
it's really concerning when you have 2 wins. They only came last year on the road in Lubbock and Ames. 2 hard places to win at, by the way. There's a lot of easier environments in Big 12,
Yeah.
but 22 road losses in conference play the last 3 seasons, that's not a winning program.
No, and again, this is an historic program that's had tons of success, and you had a Hall of Fame coach. Now, obviously, you have drama and you don't, but still, that point is valid that this is not just a Josh Eilert problem in terms of the road struggles. It's looking worse now, and maybe his job is certainly not secure, that a Hall of Fame coach would have had a secure job and all of that. But it might be a whole conversation that they need to have after they make the decision on this season and this staff, that there is a separate conversation that Ren has with, say, the new coaching staff, or if you somehow are going to keep Eilert, or whatever the case may be, in which there's a come to Jesus meeting, why we as West Virginia University can't win on the road in this conference on a consistent basis. Because to get the program to a level that it once was, you're going to have to be able to do that. And this program, Ethan, was able, it's not like we're talking about, say, the football program when they were at its peak. They were winning a conference, some could argue, that's not on the level of major conference ball now. You could make that argument and say that's why they were elite then. Maybe they'll get back there, but it's tougher. That's what Neil Brown would say, that it's tougher now than it was then. West Virginia was able to win a conference that is historically still one of the toughest in the history of the sport back in that gauntlet days of the Big East. They were able then to pivot that into a long tournament run. And it's not just that year. Obviously, there were other long tournament runs and success, home or away, when the conference was that tough. So why, if that could be done then, can it not be done now? Because you wrote about this. There's NIL money. There's prestige there. The brand is still good despite the drama. A lot of NBA connections, whether it be coaching or players. Not a lot of programs can say that. And we're talking about active players that are actually contributing. McBride having a better career year this year than even last year, and he had impact last year. Missoula getting 100 wins, third fastest as an NBA head coach. This all helps your program even now moving forward. And it's a young AD with a pretty modern thinking mind that is willing to do things that are about the modern day. This isn't stuck in the mud from years ago. So you would have to think there's a path forward that the program can get back to where it was once they figure out the coaching situation. But there might have to be a meeting on why this has been an issue, because Huggins initially was resistant of the transfer portal. He was even open about that. We've talked about that. But once he adapted to it and they did get back in the tournament, and once he was willing to get more modern before the drama, they were still struggling on the road in Big 12 play. that wasn't the case a decade earlier when the conference was also tough that they were playing in. So maybe that needs to be a conversation. Any thoughts to that end on why this is a West Virginia brand problem? And if you think it's a bigger deal that maybe makes this not as attractive to, say, a prospective coach, or if you think this can be remedied, it's just a problem that exists beyond Eilert.
Yeah, I don't think I can really pinpoint an exact reason
Right.
why this team struggled on the road the last 3 seasons. The Big East, the old Big East, is on par with this current Big 12,
And they won road
if
games.
not
Right.
more of a gauntlet. Yeah,
Right.
I mean, you could maybe make the argument of travel,
You could,
just
I guess.
having to go across the country, but at the same time, like some of these environments, like TCU, K State, at times before Jerome Tang, especially.
Yeah.
Um, there are environments in the Big 12, especially Oklahoma. That's a Oklahoma State. There's environments aren't that aren't hard to win at.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like there was more. I feel like there were more hostile environments in the old Big East than in the new in this new Big 12. So
Yeah. Right. And
it's hard to
you're,
really pinpoint.
yeah, like going to the Carrier Dome and facing Bayheim, especially coming off of a national championship in that era with Carmelo Anthony and company, and obviously even later than that, you're not going to get calls from refs. It's a tough place to play. A lot of fans there, obviously, yelling at you. And that didn't bother the West Virginia brand at that time. But that environment does seemingly bother the brand now. And we're not even talking about this season. So I think the overall point I'm trying to make, and I'd imagine you would agree, maybe not, is there were a lot of problems that people try to argue, well, that's just a problem for West Virginia because of where you are or that's the school or whatever the case may be. It's an obstacle that West Virginia has to overcome. And sometimes they have and had great years, but other times it's an obstacle that can't be overcome. I do not believe for the men's basketball program in particular, winning in a hard conference, even on the road, is an obstacle that cannot be overcome because it has been before. I do not think this is just a West Virginia problem that the program can never compete in this level of play. The big moments were in very high level of play. It's not like we're just talking about the 40s and 50s here when college basketball wasn't like this. They've done this before, even though it was a previous era of college basketball. They should be able to do it again, even though this is different with NIL, because it's not like they're resistant to it. If they were refusing to bring in transfers or they were refusing to pay anybody and we knew they were getting cheap with money and they weren't bringing in transfers, and we were talking 3 years ago when Huggins was saying, get out of town if you don't want to be here. I only want kids that are here 3-4 years. All those comments, I would say they're stuck and it's not modern. And that is the exact problem why they can't compete in the Big 12. But now that they're clearly willing to do that, and they did it to get in the tournament last year, they're doing it again. They're going to do it again. This staff's recruiting, and I'm sure if they hire somebody else, Ren's going to make sure that guy's modern thinking and willing to do transfers. So if that's not your issue, I do think this is an obstacle that can be fixed.
Yeah, I think this can be fixed, especially next season. You add in 4 Pac-12 schools. You lose Oklahoma, Texas, so that takes away
Yeah.
schools that have been that are respectable in basketball. Maybe the issue could just be player just retention, just bringing back players from the previous seasons. Seems like a lot of it seems like the last 3 seasons it's been a new team every year. Not all are familiar with Big 12 environments. It could also be that,
Right.
or it just could just be just the end of end of Bob Huggins' tenure, just not performing well on the road, and then it just trickled down into this season with Josh Eilert.
Yeah, it could just be that the end of a lot of legendary athletes or coaches, the end of their tenures aren't great. And maybe it was just, not to say he wasn't giving it his all, but maybe just it was just getting to the end and it wasn't going to be as great as it was. And then this season obviously is kind of an outlier with all the drama, and you have a coach that's never been a head coach before. So it could be as simple as that. It could be that you're bringing in transfers, but maybe you need to try to get some transfers that have 2 years of eligibility rather than just looking at transfers with only the 1 year coming in. Maybe you need to actually look at geography. You're bringing in players that are way out on the other side of the country, bringing in Kirk Kreischer from Arizona, bringing in Eric Stevenson from out on the other side of the country, out west. maybe a situation where maybe you want to look more east, more south, more on this side of the country to bring in those players to or at least aware or have played in those games, even if not at WVU. They've been to that arena before, played there. Maybe that's a small thing. Maybe that's part of it as well. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here, WV Sports Now. As we were kind of resetting and talking the state of the men's basketball program, we will talk some women's basketball because obviously the state of the women's program is much better later on in this show. But we then have to ask the question that's dangling out there that everyone's wondering. Regardless on how this season finishes, and really even if they would go lights out and win all these games, which no one's predicting, the season is still what it is. And the indictment of even this staff is still there because obviously they have had tons of adversity that's unreasonable to throw on you. And a lot of it has not been their fault. But again, as we talked about, you follow a big win with just not only losing these road games, not only even losing some games at home, but getting embarrassed at times and feeling like you're not prepared and then admitting you weren't prepared. So with all of that being said, is the writing on the wall? Can this staff do anything in particular? Josh Eilert do anything to be back next year, whether it be a one-year deal, a long-term deal, remaining the interim for another season, whatever the case may be? Can he stay on? Is there any path to Eilert staying on, or is that already over in your mind? He maybe even knows that, and they're just kind of going through the motions the rest of this year, which might be how it's been so bad that maybe they are aware that, hey, this is just over for us. It almost feels like Eilert's attending a funeral when he has these press conferences after games. Is there anything that can save him? Then what path would that be for this staff and Josh Eilert in particular to return, or is this over?
Honestly, I think the writing's on the wall. I don't think there's anything Josh Eilert and his staff can do to save their jobs. I mean, this team's 8-16. They're on pace to have the worst season since Gail Catlett's last year.
Right.
And that was 2002, so it's been a long time.
Right.
And I'm definitely opposed to giving the staff a second interim year, just based off of it would be pretty much resetting this season,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's nearly impossible to recruit high school. It's nearly impossible to tell a high school senior to come play for your team when you don't know if you're going to be there next year.
Yeah. When you're an interim, yeah.
So it's that I mean
What
that's
if they
been brought up
gave
by
him 1 year
fan base.
deals that they weren't interim though? Would that make a difference for you?
I feel like
Just like
that's
a
the same.
1 year deal? Yeah.
I feel like that'd basically be the same
Right.
same outcome pretty much. I know the fan base has brought that up more so at the beginning of the season, but it just seems pointless to me to give a second interim year when this was supposed to be the transition year anyway. So why just rip the Band-Aid off, just start fresh, start new, go out and find the right guy.
I guess the devil advocate comment to that, and I'm not in favor of doing that by any means. I do think this is the time to look for a new coach who can be the face of this brand. It'll never be the face that Bob Huggins was. You're not going to hire somebody with 900 wins and Final Fours, etc. However, to be that next guy that could maybe do it for even longer than Huggins was around if you're having success, a young coach that fits the brand, that is what I think the program should do, whether that means they got to get rid of the assistants or not, and I like them, but that got to be the number one priority, the head coach being the right guy that fits the brand and has experience to be worthy of the job. This can't be somebody that is a Josh Eilert clone. However, with all of that said, the devil's advocate, I guess, would be that while Josh Eilert wouldn't even have this opportunity if it wasn't for the Huggins drama, so he should be appreciative of it. We should be appreciative of it. And even Bren Baker has literally said that if he doesn't get this job and he's gone after a year, he's welcome to use this as a resume. It might be a resume boost for him to get an opportunity somewhere else, maybe even Group of Five, because he's been a head coach at a Big 12 at a major program. It's better than not having done it, even if you're losing. And that might be true. That's a glass half full take to tell Eilert when you're in the meeting where you're firing him or not retaining him, I guess is the better phrasing. But maybe some would argue that, okay, that was said, but then you have things that were not Huggins related that maybe would have also impacted Huggins and would have killed this year too. You have the issue where you're battling the NCAA literally with battle. that would have also been around with or without Huggins. And clearly Huggins was proving that him being there and arguing did not help Perez. So it's not like the NCAA would have been scared of messing with the Huggins program, and this mattered. That would have went on regardless who's the head coach. Could have had Coach K there. It would have been the same deal. So you have that. You have Edwards getting hurt. Maybe he would have got hurt with Huggins, and that would have ruined the year too, even if you got going when Battle came back. Kirk Creasha got suspended. That was going to happen whether Huggins was there or not. So all of those things are not Huggins related, and they certainly hurt your resume if they didn't hurt the overall year. What would be your response to somebody that would say, separate from Huggins, Eilert didn't get a fair shake because of all of those things that were not Huggins related? So try him for an interim year where no one's battling the NCAA. You're not getting suspended. You can't affect injuries, but at least have a non-suspension battle with the NCAA season, then make it a fair interim evaluation. The argument would be that he didn't get a fair evaluation because of that situation.
Yeah, it's a fair argument. I mean, seemed like since Josh Eilert was promoted, or you could say since the night Bob Huggins resigned, it
Right.
just seemed it's just a tough position. Once he got hired, didn't matter what the players thought at the time during the hiring process. Still lost 4 more guys, notably Trey Mitchell, Joe Toussaint.
Yeah.
So having the staff have to rebuild the roster or retool the roster again in the summer, yeah, it was tough. And then you're in October when practice is beginning. You're in November, game 1, and you're still dealing with problems that most programs would be dealing with in July and August. So
Right.
this this program's basically 3 months behind. If
You
you
were in
really
court hearings in December. I mean, Lord.
Yeah, you finally play with the entire original roster late January.
Yeah.
This program's been just consistently about 2 to 3 months behind everybody else.
Yeah.
So Josh Eilert's not. You can definitely make the argument he hasn't had a fair shot, but it's just, to me, I think it's just time just to move on. I just can't see a world where there's any purpose in giving him a second year, no matter what. Just like I said, they would be retooling in their transfer portal, getting fifth year seniors again, 4-year seniors, and who knows where they would be next season. But I can tell you, I don't know if they'll have any high school commits by next season, because who wants to commit to them?
Yeah, and unlike football, where you got to build a roster with a lot of players, you can't just live off the portal, even though it's a big deal. You could maybe argue, if you're a certain brand and West Virginia's not there yet, that you don't have to worry about high school recruiting and can just live in the portal, and that can be enough to get in the tournament. You can win enough to get in the tournament just doing that. And West Virginia did basically get in the tournament last year off pretty much an exclusively portal roster, with the exception of some bench players. However, it's hard to do that every year. It's hard to live there every year. And even if you're just talking portal, and it's a 1-year thing, so the kid knows he's not going to be even having to worry about 2 years from now, it's still hard to sell a transfer with 1 year left on this staff. And it's nothing against the staff. They might say, okay, I don't care about after this next interim season, but they also might say, well, how can this staff develop me as a player? Because do they have an example of making any of these current players better? Their best years are not this one, except for maybe a brief period with Battle. So no one on this roster is going to be in the NBA. So there's nothing really to argue. Where if Huggins was there, maybe that would be different, where you, like an Eric Stevenson, would come in just to play with Huggins, even if it was not about more than 1 year. That is what you had as an advantage with Huggins that will never exist again with really any other coach. That there are players that would say, even still, I'm sure, if Huggins was there, I will come for 1 year with Huggins no matter what. I want to play for Hall of Famer. That can't be said. It won't be said with Eilert, and won't be said probably with the new staff. So that is something that you're just not going to get over. But yeah, that's the point. That I think my issue is what we talked about at the beginning of this show, Ethan. If this team, and what I would probably say to Josh in that meeting if I'm Ren, if this team had a horrible out-of-conference schedule, horrible out-of-conference record, they dealt with all that adversity, Then they got everybody back. Okay, you take a while to gel. You get the big Kansas win, and then you take a little bit of a streak, and you finish the year with even 13 wins. It's not a good year at all. You're not in the tournament, but you showed me something to build off the Kansas win, and all of you together are playing well. And then you could argue to me, okay, if we didn't have suspensions, we wouldn't have lost the bye games. Okay, if Edwards was healthy, would have won 2 or 3 more games. And then, oh man, you're at 19 wins. You basically mirrored what the men's program did a season ago. That did get him in the tournament. The NET and all that wasn't the same, but you could argue that. And I could be maybe convinced if I'm Ren Baker, okay, if May doesn't want to come, if I can't get a home run higher, then I'll do 1 more year with you guys, or maybe even 2 years, so it's better for recruiting, like Ethan's talking about. But what I would respond if he argued that to me is, I'm sorry, you lost it 2 weeks ago. Like, you might have been on a path to do that, but then you're losing by 30 points in multiple games. You're losing home games. You're going from Kansas and then getting smacked by UCF, who is clearly not Kansas and lesser than you via brand, via history, via current. And those moments, I got to move on now. Because I think also part of what you're kind of alluding to in terms of we just got to move on. This is not fair to Josh Eilert at all or any of his assistants. Until you move on, even if you keep some of the assistants, but until you move on from Eilert, it's like Huggins is still looming. I think if you bring in somebody else that has nothing to do with Huggins, is not even a part of the Huggins tree, maybe that might be best. Huggins can go to games and you can eventually celebrate him like you should, but it wouldn't be like he's looming because it wouldn't be the guy that he mentored that obviously doesn't really have the resume to garner the job for a program like WVU. You would have a guy in there that has earned the job based on what he did previously, and certainly if it's like who we've mentioned, and you wouldn't have a Huggins connection outside of that he was previously the coach 2 coaches ago. It would feel like we're moving on, and it would feel like the vibes could be better. But as long as Eilert's there, the people that won Huggins around and never feel he should have been fired will never quit that opinion. If Eilert is removed, then at least the people that say Eilert's not deserving of this would get their way, and then it would be moving on with a staff that is deserving of the job that everybody at least agrees earns WVU basketball as a brand, assuming Ren hires the right coach. I think that would correct the vibes a little bit because we're getting into a dark period vibe-wise, which maybe we care about it more covering the program and fans may care about it too being around it. But if you're interviewing for a job and it's just a dark cloud, you go on social media and everything's just negative and it's a bad vibe and nobody wants to talk about anything and it's just funeral atmosphere, no one wants to celebrate anything, do you want to be there? So I think moving on maybe could also fix the vibe now rather than elongate the vibe. And again, Eilert wouldn't have been in this situation at all if it wasn't for the drama. So it's not been fair to him at all, but maybe that just has to be the case. To put a final pin in this, and we're obviously going to talk more later about the men's program and the future of this program once the season ends and these decisions are made. But if you are moving on from Josh Eilert, what does that mean for the rest of the staff? Because for anybody who doesn't know, and as you know, the rest of the staff are way more important in terms of recruiting, which is what a lot of this is about, whether it's portal or high school players. That's more their game than even the head coach, whether it be Huggins or Eilert or whoever you bring in. So if you do not continue with Eilert and his contract ends after this season ends, even before these assistants, what happens to the assistants? Are there any that are more important to keep than others for you? Do you think any of them have a better chance to stick around? And what do they do there? Or do they just hire a new coach and say, it's your staff, here's the keys to the Cadillac, do what you want, we're going to support you bringing in your guys, and fair or not is probably the end of the line for everybody if Eilert does not stay on.
Yeah, I feel like there's 2 scenarios that can go along with the assistants and the support staff. I think either the new coach is hired, he figures out who he wants to bring from his school, just his vital assistants, support staff, etc. But the dilemma here that I look at, I've just thought about since June, is you're putting the next staff in a terrible situation from day one, or the next coach in a terrible situation day one, when you have Deshaun Butler Alex Ruoff, Jordan McCabe. You have 3 former players on staff as main
Right.
assistants.
Right.
You wouldn't get on a good start with the basketball alumni if that coach didn't want to retain them. So
Or
maybe that's a
boosters.
situation where
I
Ren
mean, that
Baker
might be
makes a
important.
decision for him
Yeah, maybe. Yeah,
before the
could be.
coach even gets there.
Yeah.
So I mean I could see either scenario. Maybe the new coach decides on the support staff and not the main assistants. It just all it comes down to, it just depends on who to him is vital to bring with him at his current school.
Yeah, and obviously Ren could say these assistants are here, take it or leave it. It might be a conversation that's less direct because I don't think that's how Ren operates, just knowing him a little bit. I'd imagine Ren might have a conversation with somebody that he's interviewing and say, what scenario do you prefer? If you get this job, do you need to bring in everybody that you've ever worked with and have this be all about you? Could you work with these select assistants here? He might even explain, because Ethan, you've heard him in press conferences, so have I. He wants the right cultural fit, despite he's not a West Virginia guy, but he knows the culture now. He wants the right cultural fit. So he might even say to them, look, if we if we dismiss Deshaun Butler, this is going to be rough. So you're going to be dealing with some rough vibes here. Can you keep him? Would that be okay with you, even for a year or two, so that this isn't just all negative? Because these fans are going to be mad if you do this, this, and this to Ruoff, Jay, Butler, etc. Or he may say, who do you want to have with you? And maybe that coach will bring up, I actually like this assistant. Maybe he'll even bring up Dermar Johnson and Jay and the others and talk about what they do recruiting and say, these guys are important to this, or they got this player coming in. So it's not even about the former players in particular. This staff at one point was built off of former players, great recruiters, people that have been around a while under a Hall of Famer. That fit. They could learn from him. That fit. Under an interim who's never been a head coach before and a guy who was one of them a year ago is a different situation. So you never know what you're going to get. And it could be that Ren, if a coach says, no, I'm sorry, I got to have all my guys. I don't want any West Virginia staying there. I don't care about Butler, etc. I got to have all my guys. Ren may very well, Ethan, say, this job isn't for you. I mean, he's also interviewing them a little bit. He might say, I'm not, fans might get mad if he doesn't take a home run hire for those reasons, but who knows? Maybe he would say, well, then we're not interested because we need to do this, this, and this for our program. You don't know. And nobody knows exactly what's going to happen, but based on what we kind of know and what we're hearing and reading some tea leaves and who is out there, because now Ohio State is one of them. Jobs are opening up. Other jobs, Michigan, cough, cough, could be open. You even alluded to this in your commentary that's on WV Sports Now. So, based on what you think, based on what exists, where do you believe the West Virginia job, hypothetically, say it's open and it's not going to be Josh Eilert, where does it rank amongst jobs that will likely be open or are open in a normal offseason without all the drama? And then who are some names of coaches that realistically could fit with the Mountaineers and you think Ren Baker could be interested in, or might actually be possible coaches that get hired, again, if it's not Josh Eilert being retained?
Yeah, it seems like this coaching carousel, of course, once West Virginia is involved, uh, it's just insane. Like right now,
Yeah.
it's only Ohio State to pull out of the Power Six,
Yeah.
which includes the Big East. But like Michigan could be available, Louisville probably will be available, UCLA could be available, Creighton could be available. There's a
Yeah.
lot of other Power Five jobs. And I think in the end, West Virginia is going to end up being probably the third, fourth, fifth best job, depending on what
Okay.
becomes available. I think Ohio State's a better basketball program historically than West
Okay.
Virginia, just based on the Thad Matta era, especially. But
Yeah, there's a debate
it's
there, but I could see what you're saying. I mean, yeah.
yeah, it's debatable. It's not Ohio, it's not unanimous, but it's
Yeah.
definitely debatable. But I think what's going to end up happening, especially if these rumors are true about current Power 5 coaches leaving, just causing everything to stir up. I can't see West Virginia landing a Power 5 Big East coach. I think it will end up being
Okay.
the traditional up and coming mid major. Could look at a Nico Medved from Colorado State, a Dustin Kearns from Appalachia State, or Mark Byton from James Madison. So obviously, the home run hire is Dusty May at FAU,
Yeah.
but he's a Bob Knight guy. I think Indiana with Mike Woodson's not looking too great. They could give up on him at this offseason,
Good.
or they could hold on to him for another year. So
Could even be an
Dusty
Ohio
May
State guy. That could even be considered Ohio
could
State.
he
Yeah.
could he could. So there's just a lot of scenarios going around, and realistically to me, it just seems like right now West Virginia is just seems right to go get that up and coming mid-major coach. And I know everybody's going to compare it to Neil Brown, uh, just that
Right.
hire. But
Right.
that's the basketball program just needs to just get a fresh face.
Well, and people are naturally going to do that, but football is not basketball. And we'll get to in a moment, as I've been teasing. There is a direct basketball example of bringing in a mid-major coach that was a friend of Ren Baker that everyone thought, okay, he's just hiring his friend. This isn't the right guy. This isn't really a national search like you said you were going to do. You turned down somebody that's still having success. Kim Caldwell now was Kim Stevens at Marshall. She got married. It's why her last name's different. But she's having success still. She was in the state. People wanted her for the women's program. And Ren, even I asked him kind of, I danced around it. I was the question. And he directly looked at me and said, are you talking about Kim Stevens? And basically said, no, we're not going to hire somebody who's not at least at the major group of 5 level. And people were all upset. But he hired his friend, group of 5, and it's potentially going to be the greatest season in women's basketball history. Even if they lose out, it's still been a really great season. He's the quickest to get 20 wins in a year. This is much more than anybody would have expected from this season to this point. So that is an example that works for going to a mid-major that's just a friend of yours versus if you argue the Neil Brown thing didn't, although obviously coming off 9 wins, it took 5 years to get there. I'm sure if we're waiting 5 years for the men's program to get to a point of a climb, the fans are going to really freak out because of how it ended with Huggins. But maybe it could be like what happened with hiring Mark Kellogg. Who knows? And it does feel like that's more of a thing. Now, you mentioned you think the West Virginia program would fit around the 4 or 5 spot on jobs that will likely be open. We're talking about Michigan, Ohio State, UCLA, Louisville, Indiana, maybe. These are major historic brands. West Virginia claimed that national title from years and years and years ago, but they have legit ones. That's a little different ball game. You could argue this is unfortunate to be messing with them because if they don't fire their coaches and don't move on, maybe West Virginia's top 2 job is how it looked for a while. How does that pecking order, though, kind of rank for you? Because the top of my head, obviously UCLA historically would be a better program. You could argue a better job, but some maybe could say that wow, UCLA has been better and won more and had more deep tournament runs. The better recruits are going to USC because no one wants to be in downtown LA and maybe it's not safe there. So maybe that actually hurts you recruiting wise. But again, it's UCLA, so we'll give it to them. Michigan, I would say that's historically, even if you just look at the last 40 years and not before, because before that they kind of were nothing. That's a better job. That's still a major conference, even Big 12 is better in basketball. There's been history there. You're going to have the Fab Five guys are going to help you recruit. That's probably a better situation. Ohio State, you could argue, I think it's a debate there because the OSU job is not Michigan in terms of a cool factor. You could argue West Virginia's actually had more overall deep tournament runs throughout the last 70 years, but the Thad Matta era, yeah, probably is better than the Huggins era if we're talking comparing the two of the last 20 years. Indiana, historically, Bob Knight, obviously that has the cachet. So does Louisville, really, even though it's been rough the last couple of years, but Patino made it an elite job, and it was in the 80s too. Is it those jobs being better for you? Do you think West Virginia is actually better than any of those jobs because of what the future could be, regardless of the past? If I'm a coach and I want a job, and I don't necessarily know if I care that much what happened in 1986, 1997, 2005, I want to know what the future of the program. So maybe UCLA and some of those jobs are actually not better because maybe the future's not as bright.
Yeah, it's interesting when you look at historically versus current day. comparing West Virginia to those programs. I mean, we just talked about it. Like, you can debate Ohio State and West Virginia all time.
That's
They
the
both
one you
have
could
been
debate, probably.
consistently up
Yeah,
and down.
yeah.
But if you look at current day, what's to say Louisville's going to be in a better spot than West Virginia? They're both dealing with just the dark days of the modern day program.
Right, yeah.
Louisville
They had
hires
that
Kenny
that was
Payne.
after a scandal. Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, Louisville get after Chris Mack just transitions into Kenny Payne, and they're in year 2 of Kenny Payne. They seem like they're already done with him. So,
Right.
and they can't. I mean, they have the Yum Center downtown, and it seems like they can't get it any momentum going.
No.
Uh, 12 wins in 2 seasons, so
Really nice
it's
facility.
not.
I know. Yeah, really, really nice. Yeah.
It's they're in a worse spot than West Virginia is, and
You
especially in the
could argue
last
that.
2 seasons. So, I mean, that's if you're comparing a current day program, West Virginia's probably better than Louisville, because no matter who takes that Louisville job after Kenny Payne's got to do a lot of work, and that's the same with West Virginia. But
Yeah.
um, it just depends who, if Greg McDermott leaves Creighton or McCronin leaves UCLA. Um, Jerome Tang, even at K State, maybe. There's just a lot of coaches that currently have a job that if they leave, then things could really get interesting. Like, it seems like everybody favored on that Ohio State job's a Power Five, Power Six, with a
Yeah.
mix of Dusty May and Nico Medved. So it just depends who gets the ball rolling, and that could end up affecting West Virginia's hire as well.
Yeah, and Ethan, you could also ask. Okay. I mean, I think everyone would probably say the Michigan job is better. You have the Fab Five connection, which is a thing. I mean, even players today know them, watch the documentary. Having them going to games and now being united again and helping you recruiting is not a small deal. If I get a pick, do I want Deuce McBride or the Fab Five? Probably still them, even though they're older. You have the facilities, you have the conference, you have history there, you have money. Obviously, you won a football national title, and that was the main focus, but they may kick some into basketball now. Probably a better job, but there's a question that's dangling out there. You had a Fab Five member as your head coach and didn't win. And I get he wasn't really a coach, so maybe that's why. But why weren't more recruits coming for Juwan Howard? Why wasn't the Fab Five vibe helping him more? Why couldn't he win more? Was it just about him, or the Michigan program not where it was even under Beeline? Is that an argument that
Yeah,
West Virginia could make if you're competing for a job?
that definitely is an argument. It seemed like Michigan hit their peak with Juwan Howard right away.
Yeah.
They had a 1 seed during the bubble tournament in 2021, and got bounced in the first or in the Sweet 16, and then from there they pretty much just went downhill. So Juwan, I mean, it just seemed like so many issues with Juwan Howard just off the court, and
Yeah.
he's had his health issues
Yeah.
this season as well.
Yeah.
Just a lot of distraction, and even them missing out on guys in the portal just because of the academic expectations. They had commitments from Terrence Shannon at Illinois, Caleb Love from North Carolina, who ended up going to Arizona. I mean, they had these top transfers committed, but their academic
Yeah.
level wouldn't allow them to get in. So they just had a lot of weird. It's almost similar to West Virginia. They just had a lot of weird stuff going on, and Juwan Howard,
Yeah.
his coaching isn't good enough to overcome that.
Yeah, and the only difference I will say, and I'm sure Eilert would be screaming this if he's watching or listening to this show, what happened to Eilert in West Virginia, not self-inflicted. Yeah, the health issues. We hope he has great health. But what happened with Juwan Howard since the big first year to now, very self-inflicted. Like, outside of his personal health, you're fighting players, fighting coaches. He had multiple incidents of that ilk last year. Getting suspended yourself, you can't fix academic standards and your physical health, but he did some things that Eilert did not do that absolutely made that harder, that it's hard to feel bad. But imagine trying to correct the vibe. We're talking vibe check here. Imagine being the AD that's going to fire a Fab Five member. Like, are you going to have to sell this to Jalen Rose and Chris Webber, who just became friends again, that, yeah, we want you to help us recruit, but we're going to fire your boy. And then we hope Juwan Howard also helps us recruit despite getting fired. Like that's the negative of bringing in a legend, because you bring in a guy and then you're going to have to fire him unless you put a statue up. So they probably are not thrilled about this decision they're making. I mean, he's not obviously a Huggins, but he was a integral member of the Fab Five.
It's terrible timing.
It's terrible timing. Not good.
Like, as soon as the Fab Five reunites at Michigan this month, Juwan Howard has been on. I mean, he's been on the hot seat for probably almost a whole calendar year at this point. But it's just terrible timing. Once the Fab Five gets back together, now the AD starting to make comments on Howard's job. And when you say certain keywords like at this time,
as of now,
we'll evaluate it. I mean, that's writing on the wall. It seems like the Michigan job will open up. Maybe they give him one more year.
Look at the picture. Even when the Fab Five was there and they were reuniting, and even when they were in the national final, Chris Webber was in a freaking luxury box and everyone else is sitting down the court. They hadn't been together, all there hand in hand, sitting next to each other in 30 years or 20 years. And then Juwan Howard standing over there as the coach while they're to the right doesn't look happy. They're smiling. It's like he's mean mugging the situation. And it's probably because of what you're saying. He's like, yeah, this is nice, but I'm getting fired in a month. Like, I'm not having fun. So that's the problem. And I really think the only way Juwan Howard is there next year is if probably members of the Fab Five bang on the table and almost demand this man get one more crack at things. And they might even say still no, because it's been really bad. They might need a moving on as well from this era of Michigan basketball, which unfortunately, they won a national title before the Fab Five, but the Fab Five was the best era of Michigan basketball ever. I would still say at least the most revolutionary era, even though they also went to a final and had success under John Beilein in Final Fours. But they almost need a new vibe check, because this arguably is the worst time frame of Michigan basketball in the last 30 plus years, really since prior to Fisher winning the national title and then the Fab Five. You could make that argument for sure. Ethan Buck, Mike Asti. What I do want to get to now as we wrap up the show, men's basketball program, they've been losing. It's rough. This is maybe the worst era of men's basketball in 20 years, and they're likely going to move on. And then they got to hit this next hire out of the park. Does Ren Baker, or else there's going to be just due criticism. A lot of work for Ren Baker. He probably doesn't have many vacations planned coming up in the spring this summer. He's not having to go find a football coach, but who knows if that football program doesn't keep on winning. And right now, it's likely he's going to be looking for a basketball coach. Who knows who he'll eventually hire. And we know who some want. That's not going to happen. So he's going to go do a national search. It won't be with drama, but a lot of work for him to do to find that right guy, because this next hire will likely be viewed historically as the guy that replaces Huggins, even though you have the Eilert bridge. Like, people compare it to the Bill Stewart era. I don't think it's fair to Bill Stewart, because they won 9 games 3 straight years, and it wasn't just 1 year. He wasn't interim, but he got a job because Pat White said he should get it. That's just reality. But this will be a bridge. Like, this is going to be Eilert's going to be a bridge. The next guy, if he sucks for 2 or 3 years, it'll again be people saying you shouldn't have got rid of Huggins. You would have had at least 2 or 3 more good years with Huggins. So this is an important hire for Ren Baker, to say the least. But Ethan, the women's program, they've been winning. Mark Kellogg, 1 year in, no one can argue this. Home run hire for Ren Baker, friend or not, group of 5 or not. This is a home run hire so far, assuming this keeps on moving. No one thought this. Even he said in his opening press conference, we're looking at a rebuilding year. We'll see about the future. No, I mean, they're having an historic season so far. However, they're barely getting ranked. They are winning, but they do have a bad loss on the resume from way back against Iowa State, even though they avenged it. The out-of-conference record really only looks at the Penn State game as being worthy. And what we even double-checked before the show here, Joe Lenardi has them as a 6 seed, basically playing a road game way across the country, which is even worse situations than Mike Carey was in when they were a 3 seed years ago consistently. and people complained about that. So what does this women's program need to do the rest of the season to make themselves in a situation that can be successful? And why are they being, what fans I'm sure are going to say, being disrespected? One of the best seasons in program history, 20 wins. Your record is what your record is. To get a 6 seed all across the country, 5-4 seed, couple losses, 20 plus wins already here in mid-February. What else do they have to do? The committee basically saying they should have went undefeated to get even a respectable game in the tournament. Almost sounds unreasonable there. Like what do they have to do, and why have they been disrespected to this point?
Yeah, I just think an overall look on the season, this is just kind of really quickly on the men's side. This is pretty much what could be a preview of what Ren Baker can do on the men's
Yeah.
coaching hire. Mark Kellogg, group of five mid-major coach, Stephen F. Austin. Obviously, he won there, but just he really never had that Power Five opportunity. So hiring an up and coming guy and winning 20 plus games year one, quickest in school history to get the 20 wins. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's different on the women's side than the men's with the rankings, the polls, bracketology, because there's so many more powerhouses in women's basketball. When you look at like the South Carolinas, Iowas, LSU's, even
Yeah.
Baylor's
Yeah.
at some points, UConn, obviously. When
Yeah.
you look at
Iowa recently,
there's
obviously. Yeah.
there's just so many powerhouses in each conference.
Yeah.
So when West Virginia has 2-3 losses now, they're 21-3, and
Yeah.
they're barely sneaking into the top 25. Then you
Right.
look at the top 25, and there's not one school on the list that has more than 3 losses. So it's very different on the men's side. There could be a Big 12 team right now with 8 losses, and they would be getting votes. So it's way different on the women's side. I don't think necessarily West Virginia is getting disrespected, but they obviously could really improve their resume if they have that signature win, especially in conference play. Penn State was a good non-conference win at home,
Yeah, it was.
but
They were
when
ranked
you
at the
look
time.
at
I think
when
they
you
were
look at
25th at the time. Yeah.
yep, yeah, they were ranked at the time, but when you West Virginia's had opportunities to get that signature win. They've played Texas, who was top 10 at the time. They've played Baylor, who was ranked in
Yeah.
Waco. They've had their opportunities to get that signature win. They just haven't been able to. But I guess the good news is for them, and this will really test them here in the next week. They have 3 straight ranked games, so they immediately have a little mini gauntlet. If they can win 2 out of 3 of those, or even
Right.
just get one, it might be able to help. They
What
just
if you
need that
lose 2 out of
signature
3? You're
win.
looking at like a 12 seed now? Like,
Yeah,
that's the
if you
problem.
lose 2 out of 3, then it might actually really hurt West Virginia just based on this. Then the voters, the bracketologists will just look, and computers will just look at it and go, "Well, this is why they weren't higher, even with only 3 losses."
Yeah.
Once they play real teams, they lose if they lost 2 out of 3. But if West Virginia can get that signature resume win, they would move up in that. They'd move up in bracketology. Like the fact that West Virginia has 3 losses and they're projected as a 6 seed to play across the country in California is
Yeah.
you don't see that on the men's side. So I don't think it's
No.
a thing of them getting disrespected. I just think that's how women's basketball is in 2024.
Yeah, and obviously the top programs get home games to start the tournament that doesn't exist on the men's side. It's not as fair, which is why you a lot of the time saw the same programs make deep runs. I will say the counter to what Ethan's saying, which I would imagine what Mark Kellogg is saying to his team, this particular season, Ethan, is more wide open than ever before on the women's side. We're years removed from Connecticut as a powerhouse. Same with Tennessee, even Notre Dame. Yeah, South Carolina is still there. Iowa with Caitlin Clark setting a record. She lost the other day. So, like, they are vulnerable even when she scores. It is not like they are unbeatable. LSU, clearly vulnerable. They've dropped games. West Virginia could argue that this could be the historic season that a program like West Virginia that has not got past Sweet 16 on the women's side could have this be the weird Final Four year for the program to make a run, because these programs that normally go far are vulnerable. That would, I'm sure, be what he's selling to them, that forget the seed line. We can beat anybody because they're getting beat to them and we're just as good as them who beat them. That's probably what he's saying. That's a coach talking. I'd imagine that's the sales pitch that Mark Kellogg is offering his team, going to try to motivate them before this gauntlet. And if they do win 2 out of 3, win all 3, get out of this with the season not totally tanking, and they go to the tournament, even the Big 12 tournament, I'm sure he's going to say all this to them. Hypothetically, though, what if they would win the Big 12 tournament? What do you think the ceiling is? Because we're discussing that the women's side offers parity this year, but regardless to that, a few losses, the out-of-conference schedule wasn't strong, they're barely getting ranked. They are still getting ranked, which you could argue actually is being nice to the program. They lose and they're still ranked, but they're barely getting ranked. Right now, 20-plus wins and they're a 6 seed. So if they do even win the tournament and win out, the win-loss record still might not be better than some of these other programs. They might move into the top 20 and maybe get a 5 or a 4 seed, but it's not like they're going to move to the 1 or 2 line. What do you think the ceiling is? Like, is a 4 seed the absolute ceiling? What can they do the rest of this year? Because the way you kind of were talking, it almost seems like this is the line, and once you lose 3 games, you're almost eliminated from those top 2 seed lines, even if you're a major conference tournament champion.
Yeah, I feel like if West Virginia gets in with 5, 6 losses, kind of similar to a couple of Mike Carey seasons,
Yeah.
by winning the Big 12 tournament, I feel like they should overtake some of those Big 12 teams that are ahead of them. Like they should. I think it's realistic. I think the ceiling for them realistically would be get a 3, like a low 3 seed, high 4 seed. I think that's
Okay.
a stealing if they finish the year off well.
Might get you
Uh,
closer to home at least, rather than going to Los Angeles.
yeah, yeah. If they go to Kansas City, run the
Yeah.
field, and then when they would have that under their belt, and by then they would have they would have their signature win on the season that I was talking about earlier. They would arguably have 2 to 3 of those signature wins by that point.
Yeah.
So I think the ceiling, just based off of when you look at the rest of the conferences in women's basketball, that I think it's fair to say they're sitting to be a 3 seed, maybe high 4 seed.
Yeah, and I think also what's positive, and maybe this could happen on the men's side as well, if Ren also hits the men's hire out of the park like he clearly has with the women's hire, regardless of how this season finishes. If you've noticed, and we are covering this a little bit now on WV Sports Now, they are doing very well in recruiting. So what's going on the floor is impacting off the floor for the future. There are recruits, high school, portal, etc., that are clearly seeing this and saying, I want to be a part of this and want to play for him. That may not have been the case a season earlier. Maybe that wasn't even the case under Mike Carey towards the end. Some were arguing that was getting stale and they weren't as much of a contender as they say were under Meg Bolger and in Loser Pella in that era. So maybe that's a positive for the future. It looks like Mark Kellogg has this program on lock for the next 5 years, regardless of how this year ends. Even if they would tank this year, the argument has to be that they already have kind of exceeded expectations for this season that he even had when he took over a program that only had really one star in Quinterly that really wasn't a star a year ago. And everyone else he's kind of trying to get more from or sprinkle new girls in. And to have 20 plus wins at this point, pretty much I think we can safely say that aside from losing every single game the rest of the year, maybe even if they do that, I mean, they're almost locked tournament. They're almost as an at-large bid at least, assuming they just play the way they've been playing. And even they don't get any more big wins and they just beat who they should beat and lose all the other big games, they're going to get in. They're going to get in. So that wasn't a guarantee. And to be fair to Don P, it wasn't what was expected a year earlier. But what people got to remember, this is a direct comparison that Ethan's giving you. That was drama. We talked about it. We broke it. It was on the site. She left them in the dust. That was 1 year in the tournament. It wasn't a Hall of Fame coach, but that was drama. Those girls were mad, didn't know about the future. I know for a fact, and Mark Kellogg said this, that everyone who's there now that was there wanted to leave. He had to resell them. It was not what you want. And Ren Baker had to deal with drama there, and he was open about it. And yet it's going to lead this program in the tournament. I don't think anybody would have thought that. And if after the Don P drama, they'd missed a year of the tournament, I think people would have understood why. It's because of the drama and you lost players. So they've already exceeded expectations. But of course, as we all know, this happened on the baseball program. They won a Big 12 title, but yet they ended up sharing it rather than winning it outright because they lost the last series of the season despite getting in the regional. If this team would lose those big games Ethan's talking about, or would lose early in in conference play, people would say is typical West Virginia athletics. They build you up to tear you down. and we'll see how this ends. But I think there's a reason to believe that Mark Kellogg, who's obviously not familiar with potentially what the pain some of you fans have felt for the past many years all across WVU sports, he probably is just trying to coach his butt off, and we'll see about what ends up happening on the women's side. So, Ethan, I think that's where we'll leave it for this show. If we can't do post-game shows, and we'll try to do more of them before the end of the season, both maybe on the men's and maybe even give you one on the women's side, we'll definitely have some shows before we actually get into the full March Madness, certainly previewing what happens there, certainly talking after Big 12 tournament play, and then we'll give you more of these, even if they're just midweek resets and kind of updates on the state of these programs. But it is unfortunate because you got a former player, you got in Bridges, you got Baylor, you got some conference games, and it feels like everyone's checked out at this point. I mean,
everybody's checked out at this point. I think even internally, I think coaches and players are just looking at that calendar every day, going tick, waiting for mid-March.
Yeah, I mean, like, what are we doing here? Like, I mean, am I gonna, skip dinner with my family or watching my kids play soccer to talk to this recruit when I know I'm getting fired? Or am I going to watch my kid play soccer, and if the recruit wants to text, cool. If not, I'm getting fired. So, like, I mean, that's real. I'm not saying in any way that's anything that's been said to us, but like, that's real. That's what I would be thinking. That has to be in the mind of these guys. You just hear Eilert. I mean, like, it's kind of been the tone all year. Honestly, it's been a funeral all year, but even hearing him now, it's one of those. We got to get a body language expert, Ethan, because it's post game press conference starts. It's like, like that's what it is. That's how it starts. Every one. Like I feel it. You feel it. Someone should give him a hug. I feel like
it's just been a long 9 months for anybody associated with the program, even the fans. Like, it's been a long 9 months. It's not even, like I said earlier, not even during the football season, when practice is beginning in October for basketball. Even at that point, they're still dealing with waiver issues, suspensions, injuries. So there was really no just rest time for this program at all, like these other programs have had.
Yeah, you could, and other coaches have said this. It isn't us. Other coaches who are coaching rivals or may or may not like West Virginia basketball have literally said what they're dealing with is unreasonable. But I think two things can be true. We agree it's been unfair, it's been unreasonable, but I'm sorry, a good athletic director is probably going to say, I know it's been unfair and unreasonable, yet we got to move on. Like, I'm sorry, we still got to move on, because the only fix for this, and it almost sounds like really media, fans, coaches, players, whether they're going to be there in the future or not, we all need maybe this group therapy session. Honestly, maybe we all need to get invited to the Coliseum after the season, get a therapist down center court, and talk to everybody, because that's how it's been the last 9 months or so. But at the end of the day, it feels like Ren Baker is going to move on. And again, I'm not saying this is a fact, but I would imagine he's already thinking this. He's already had sidebar convos. He already has people in mind. I think that what we're saying will be tested, Ethan. We believe the history, the NIL money, who you have as alums, can make this an attractive job, even though there are historic programs that are also open right now with big money too. We'll find out if that's true. I don't think you can fairly judge it in the summer off the drama in July. That was impossible to ask a coach to basically torch the program he was just at and ruin them for 20 years to come join West Virginia when you got to re-recruit kids that say they want to be there. But as you alluded to, I think one thing Ren Baker is going to definitely do, Ethan, and he can just basically, anyone who's upset about this as a player can point to who was there before who you're friends with. I would imagine Ren's going to ask them what they want, like he always will do with every program, but he's not living and dying off of it anymore. I'd imagine that if they say, it got to be Eilert and company sticking around, or whoever has eligibility left, we're going to leave, or we're going to tell our friends not to come here in the portal, Ren's probably going to say, yeah, I heard that before, 6 months ago. I'm not scared. Like I was told that before. Like,
yeah. It made sense in June to listen to the players. And,
right.
there was a reason why Eilert was named the interim coach, and there's a reason why Ren Baker talked to other coaches in June. Like this, it really just didn't seem right from the start. So, yeah, you can't, now that West Virginia actually has a normal off season coming up, they have from March to October, essentially, for an entire off season.
Figuring really March to June, but yeah, until October. Yeah, right.
You're not dealing with half a summer. So I think back in June, Ren Baker really should have took players' opinions on it. But now, when you have March, you're going to have to reload in the transfer portal anyway. What's the point in listening or prioritizing and listening to the players? Their opinion is still important, but not nearly as important as it was in June.
Yeah, he'll have the exit interview, and I'm sure he'll ask him, "What would you do if you're me?" And they may very well say, "I love the staff. Got to be all Eilert and the staff." But I've heard, I'm sure you've heard, that a lot of those players who said it got to be Eilert before, they've kind of admitted they did that to help out their friends who were on the staff and to Eilert and do him a solid, even though they knew they were going to leave. I get asking him at the time, but yeah, this is totally different. Like, and you're going to have that. There are going to be players in their exit interview that are going to say, it got to be Eilert, because they just want to support who they're working with and who they're friends with. They're not going to say, fire my friend for an outsider, but it still might be what Ren Baker does. And it likely is what Ren Baker does. And Ren Baker is going to make hard decisions. And I think he's the right AD for the job. But full on, if you want to even read more of Ethan's takes on this, it's in his commentary that was on WVSN recently. And there's going to be more of those, because we're going to hear more, and we're going to get to a final resolution here pretty soon that Ren Baker probably already has in his mind nonetheless. So that will do it here for this kind of reset and update of both the men's and a little bit of the women's program as well. Ethan Bock, Mike Asti here. Again, WV Sports Now for our coverage. We'll see if the men's program can save themselves the rest of this year. We also will see if the women's program can kind of gain respect and where they end up and how their season ends, and then how it's viewed for the future of that program, because they're setting some history right now that I don't think anybody expected, and they need some love. They also need to have stop having their games head to head with the men, for crying out loud, when it doesn't have to be. It does not have to be. And there's no way Ren wants that. It just doesn't have to be. So that needs to be done with. And I think they would even agree. And by the way, they do. So hopefully that is no longer a thing. And at least in March, they're going to have their own time, because the men won't be there playing. It's going to be all the women, and we'll see who focuses in on that NCAA tournament first round game when the women are there, the men are not. And they deserve the love. They deserve the support for at least that weekend. And then we'll see from there. But that'll do it for this edition of the show. Again, find us on socials and also WV Sports Now for all of our coverage of West Virginia basketball, both the men and the women.